Hello, it's Kelvin from Rent My Tent, and I'm here to tell you about our project. So we're focused on the problem that many people purchase tents for single use cases. They don't actually know beyond that single use case, so that festival they're going, that trip they're going on, when they're next going to use their tent. And if that behaviour continues, we just end up with a lot of tents and only a limited amount of use. So we want to sort of drive down that behaviour, and to do that we've come up with Rent My Tent. So Rent My Tent is a novel concept in terms of it brings together somebody selling a tent with somebody who wants to hire a tent. So it's not the typical buyer meets seller, it's the hirer meets the seller. So the tents that come onto the marketplace have obviously been purchased from a retailer and they are being sold to the Rent My Tent marketplace. And to sort of explain that in some steps, I'm going to point you to the sort of graphic here where you can see the person here at the top is somebody who's just bought a tent. They've been to a retailer. They've then gone and used their tent, and then they realise that they don't actually have another use case for it. So the best thing they can do is sell it on to somebody who actually needs it. But they come across the concept of Rent My Tent, and they decide that they want to list it on Rent My Tent. So we can see somebody listing a tent here, and somebody finds that listing on Rent My Tent because they need to hire the tent. And what's happening here is a transaction between the person who owned the tent and the person who now wants to hire it. But as I said, this is novel. This isn't the case that this person hires a tent and hands it back to the other person, because they've sold it. So if you've grasped that, the beauty of this is that once that tent has been sold to the marketplace, once that first transaction happens, the tent is then always up for hire, except for when the rental periods occur. So obviously here we're seeing the very first rental period. Now that could be 7 days, 14 days, and obviously this person could keep the tent longer than that, but they would be the custodian of it. And whilst they're the custodian of that tent, it's automatically listed on the marketplace so that other people could hire it. So they remain the custodian of that tent until the moment when the next person comes along to rent it. So that's what we see here. The original owner of the tent, the person that hires the tent with the blue trousers, and then finally in the yellow trousers, this is the next person that comes along who hires the tent. And this, essentially could go on forever, depending on the good condition of the tent. And we power this incentive a bit like a deposit return scheme. So you'll be familiar with deposit return schemes because you might buy a bottle of Coke from the supermarket and you'll get 10p of that cost will be returned to you when you return the bottle. My tent works in a much similar way, where the person who's hiring the tent pays the seller, but they also lock up a deposit. Now that deposit is the incentive for that person to take good care of the tent and to ensure that the next person that comes along that wishes to hire it that the transaction goes ahead. They make sure this happens, because obviously if they don't, they have a deposit which is essentially lost because it's locked up. Powering this is the Ethereum blockchain and non-fungible tokens. The non-fungible tokens are famous because of CryptoKitties. They are mostly used for sort of trading games, but beyond that, beyond the gaming community, non-fungible tokens have many other potential use cases, and that's what's sort of really exciting here about using that technology. There's a lot of development going on in the gaming world, and then there's a lot of good ideas elsewhere that could leverage that technology. So that's what we're doing here. So how does this make money? There's actually a number of ways. We can have a membership fee, so that when somebody lists, they have to be a member to be able to list their tent on the marketplace. They also have to be a member, obviously, to hire a tent, so there's a membership fee. We can take a small transaction fee between the sort of seller and the hirer. There will also be lapse deposits, so if the person who hires a tent doesn't actually complete the next onward transaction, they kind of default on it, then they would lose the deposit. Now that deposit could be claimed by Rent My Tent, but it also could be distributed amongst the members of Rent My Tent. So there's a few ways we can monetize this. Tents being abandoned at festivals is a very specific problem that exists, and that's where we can probably get the most traction, by working alongside festivals.